Since before the time of the Roman expansion into Gaul, peoples known in the Latin language as Germani have played a leading role in shaping the ethnic, linguistic, and political landscape of Europe. Germanic tribes would sweep across Europe in the 4th and 5th century, leading to a collapse of the Western Roman state, and gaining power in Italy, Gaul, Britain, Iberia, and even North Africa. Yet what were their origins? And what relationship do they have with modern people who speak Germanic languages? In the English language, we tend to use German to refer only to those of the modern German state, while we use the term Germanic peoples to speak about those who are of a Germanic ethnic background and speak a Germanic language. This includes Germans, but also Austrians, many Swiss, Dutch, Danes, Swedes, Norwegians, Icelanders, English, and others. As the focus here is the ancient origins rather than the more modern history of the different nation-states, I have chosen to refer to Germanic peoples. The English word German comes from the Latin Germani. The likely etymology means spearman, from Proto-Germanic geri, meaning spear, and man. It may have been the name of a tribe the Romans first interacted with, but which fell out of use, or it may have been a warrior title. Of the origins of the Germanic tribes, Tacitus provides the following account, which he is believed to have learned either directly or secondhand from the ancient Germanic vulva or witch, Gana, who visited Rome and gained an audience with Emperor Domitian. In their old ballads, which among them are the only sort of register in history, they celebrate Tuisto, a god sprung from the earth, and Manus, his son, as the fathers and founders of the nation. To Manus they assign 3 sons, after whose names so many people are called: the Ingaevones, dwelling next to the ocean, the Erminones, in the middle country, and all the rest, Instaevones. While seemingly later tribes likewise tried to claim the exalted status of being among the first, these 3 were the most genuinely accredited, and their names may carry some deeper meaning. Ingaevones appears to come from the word Ingvi, which is used in Norse mythology as a name for the god Freyr. Possibly the tribal name means son of Ingvi. Irminones seems to be formed from the word Irmin, meaning great, possibly son of the Great One. Its Old Norse cognate is Jormungandr, one of the names of Odin. Possibly this also has a connection with the later attested Irminsul, meaning the Great Pillar. Widukind of Corvi said of it the following: When morning was come, they set up an eagle at the eastern gate, and erecting an altar of victory, they celebrated appropriate rites with all due solemnity, according to their ancestral superstitions. To the one whom they venerate as their god of victory, they give the name of Mars, and the bodily characteristics of Heracles, imitating his physical proportion by means of wooden columns. And in the hierarchy of the gods, he is the sun, or, as the Greeks call him, Apollo. From this fact, the opinion of these men appears somewhat probable to hold that the Saxons were descended from the Greeks, for the Greeks call Mars Hermes, a word which we use even to this day, either for blame or praise, without knowing its meaning. Now, there can be no doubt that the god which Widukind is speaking of is Odin, although his description differs from the later Norse Odin. It is Odin who grants military victory, and there is strong reason to believe that he had an association with the sun, at least at times, and probably more archaically. He comes to battle wearing a blazing golden helmet. He looks over the world at dawn, according to Lombard tales. Saxo Grammaticus compared his enemies fleeing from him to the darkness fleeing before the light of the sun. And like the sun, he is swallowed by the wolf, during Ragnarok. Like Apollo, he strikes from afar with his spear and provides guidance to men. Of course, some have taken this account as pure confusion. After all, he says Mars is equivalent to Hermes. However, it may be more insightful than taken at first glance. First, he is trying to connect the word Irmin to the Greek Hermes. This is a type of folk etymology that medieval people often engaged in. But moreover, when he says that the Greeks call Mars Hermes, he may not mean Roman Mars, but the Germanic god Irmin, which is also used as a name for Odin, which he earlier equated with Mars. This corresponds exactly to the frequent confusion between the two gods in Roman Gaul, and some early Germanic sources which equated Odin with Mercury, while others, like Saxo Grammaticus or Adam of Bremen in the early medieval period, link him more to Mars. Thus, 2 of the 3 original Germanic tribes are named as sons of Germanic gods. The third tribe, the Istaivones, are sometimes thought to have derived their name from the ash, as in the ash tree, possibly related to the name of the first man in Old Norse myth. But this is based partly on alternative forms of the name found in different accounts, and is much more tentative. So in our earliest sources, the Germanic peoples recognize themselves as a common ethnic group with a common origin. Their identity as a people is thus as old as almost any other in the world. This collective identity to some extent persisted into the medieval period, with the Anglo-Saxon Beowulf tale being primarily based in Denmark. All of the later medieval origin accounts by various Germanic peoples preserved the knowledge that they had come from Scandinavia or North Germany. Thus, the Germans, in our earliest sources, confirm that they viewed themselves as a common ethnic group with a united origin, despite being divided into numerous tribes. Their common ancestry was a key part of their foundational myths. Much like the Hebrew Torah, it places its focus on the common origin of their people, also created by their God. The myths of the early Germans to explain their origins may not have been literally true, but the reality is that the Germanic peoples do share a common genetic origin. A new theory for the origins of the Germanic peoples was put forward in a genetic paper published on March 14, 2024, titled Steppe Ancestry in Western Eurasia and the Spread of the Germanic Languages, by Hugh McCull et al. It explains, "We find evidence for a previously unknown, large-scale Bronze Age migration within Scandinavia, originating in the east and becoming widespread to the west and south, thus providing a new potential driving factor for the expansion of the Germanic speech community. This East Scandinavian genetic cluster is first seen 800 years after the arrival of the corded ware culture, the first steppe-related population to emerge in northern Europe, opening a new scenario implying a late rather than a middle Neolithic arrival of the Germanic language group in Scandinavia. Moreover, the non-local hunter-gatherer ancestry of this East Scandinavian cluster is indicative of a cross-Baltic maritime rather than a southern Scandinavian land-based entry. Later in the Iron Age, we find a southward push of admixed eastern and southern Scandinavians into areas including Germany and the Netherlands, previously associated with Celtic speakers, mixing with local populations from the eastern North Sea coast. Though the details of this early development are still obscure, Germanic peoples definitely emerged from the corded ware culture. The corded ware culture is an archaeologically and genetically defined population that emerged around 3000 BC from a westward movement of steppe pastoralists. These steppe people were likely not the Yamnaya, but a related population possibly ancestral to both the Yamnaya and the corded ware culture, with both corded ware and Yamnaya developing concurrently and with some interaction and influence upon one another. Probably they spoke related languages that were still to some degree mutually intelligible. Corded ware individuals had high levels of steppe ancestry, sometimes as much as 70% in early samples. However, the corded ware culture spread over a massive territory and developed regional differences. It's believed that the ancestors of the Indo-Iranian culture ultimately had part of their origins in an eastern branch of the corded ware culture that migrated further east. Some believe that the bell beakers likewise developed from the corded ware, after mixing with a Neolithic European culture in Central Europe, while some others believe that they were an offshoot of the Yamnaya who had migrated into the Hungarian basin. It's also probable that Balto-Slavic came ultimately from corded ware. So for years I have worn a protective amulet on my keychain. Now on one side it shows two figures in a boat. It's from a picture stone in Gotland, Sweden. On the other side it says, written in modern English but in runes, "Unharmed go forth, unharmed return, unharmed safe home." Now these are made of bronze, and I bought a number of them years ago from a wonderful jeweler in the United States, with the intent of offering them up to supporters of the channel, but I misplaced them and only found them recently when I was moving. But now if you click the link in the description of this video, you'll be taken to the store on my website, where you can pick one up for yourself or a loved one, and help support the channel at the same time. Thank you so much for your support. Now these corded ware peoples were not steppe pastoralists themselves. After all, they didn't dwell in the steppes. They integrated pastoralism with farming methods and hunting, more suitable to the terrain that they inhabited. The battle axe culture was the first migration, dating to around 2800 BC. They replaced the pre-Indo-European funnel beaker culture. Sometime later, another migration of corded ware-derived people entered Scandinavia, this time with a higher percentage of hunter-gatherer related ancestry, not local to Scandinavia, but picked up from the Latvian hunter-gatherers, showing that these were corded ware people from the Baltics who had mixed with the local population there. It was this later population movement from Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia that crossed the Baltic Sea and settled in eastern Scandinavia that laid the foundations of the Germanic language. However, around 1700 BC, this corded ware soup of migrations into Scandinavia came to an end, and from then until around 300 AD, the population would blend but remain relatively unchanged. They had absorbed the previous hunter-gatherer population in the area, and it's believed that at least some Germanic vocabulary, which does not appear to be Indo-European, came from these groups. Now it's possible that this corded ware divide may show us a split between Germanic and Italo-Celtic. The recent study seems to suggest this, with bell beaker associated lineages tracking almost exactly with the historically attested Celtic regions, while corded ware lineage is represented by the Germanic core, with central regions having an overlap of both, showing later migrations and mixing. The study shows a detectable and stable delineation between corded ware and bell beaker ancestry throughout the Iron Age, which corresponds to the known historical divide between Celtic and Germanic people, making it reasonable to assume that the original dividing line between these ethno-linguistic groups was their separate origins in the bell beaker and corded ware cultures. Living in such proximity for thousands of years, the Germanic peoples formed a relatively unified cultural and ethnic identity. This contrasts with people like the Celts, who were very much successful at spreading their language and culture over vast territories early on, but which became fragmented early as a result. While the Proto-Celtic language began to splinter by my estimation around 700 BC or earlier, the Proto-Germanic language did not begin to splinter until around 200 AD. Languages splinter due to a loss of contact and the development of regional forms that evolve differently over time. Because the Germanic peoples lived close to each other until just prior to the migration era, localized forms didn't develop. While the study is able to detect regional genetic patterns, the actual differences are minute, much smaller than the differences between, say, Welsh and Scottish. They were not isolated off from the rest of Europe, however, but were in close contact with the nearby Unitique culture. They exported amber and in return received metals, which they used to create some of the finest metalwork of the Bronze Age, utilizing lost wax casting methods. By the number of artifacts found, the region became one of the richest in Europe, with more Bronze Age swords recovered there than in any other area of Europe. Clearly, investing so much wealth into weapons, they were also of the same warlike nature that is recorded in early histories. Around 70% of burials included weapons. The largest known battle known to have taken place in Bronze Age Europe occurred in the Tolense Valley, possibly involving 4,000 men. Recent genetic studies of those who fell on the battlefield reveal two distinct population groups, one group aligning with Nordic corded ware background, another with DNA similar to that of southern Germany. What we could be seeing is just one of many massive, ancient, and unrecorded battles between ancient Proto-Celts and Proto-Germanic peoples. However, their warrior culture was a disciplined one. Intra-ethnic violence appears to have been relatively low, with most military violence directed at an outside ethnic group. In other words, the different Germanic tribes were not fighting among themselves, but were cooperating together and raiding others, and they are thought to have fought to control lucrative amber trade routes. Yet they did not only engage in war. As early as 1300 BC, they were already building the famous longhouses. They also constructed large, fortified towns, such as that discovered in Hunenberg around the 12th century BC. Massive and numerous tumuli were created for the honored dead. The King's Grave in Sweden is a good example of just such a site. Within was found stone art, some of which shows ancient continuity of religious ideas over thousands of years. Two figures in a boat, wheels, chariots, are likely related to the notion of transporting the dead king into the other world. In Denmark alone, it is estimated there were around 50,000 tumuli built between 1500 and 1150 BC. They maintained extensive trade networks with the tumulus and later urnfield cultures as well, and even with Mycenaean Greeks. While Baltic amber appears in Egypt around this time, some Egyptian artifacts have been found in Bronze Age Scandinavia, evidence that their extensive trade network stretched even beyond Europe. Their religion at this stage, as with much of Bronze Age Europe, shows the powerful position of the sun. The Trundholm sun chariot is one of the most captivating examples of this, and refers to the later recorded myths of the sun being pulled through the sky by the horses Arvakr and Alsvithir. However, the later Norse sun goddess does not appear a good fit for the significance of the Bronze Age sun cult. Rather, it seems that the sun was earlier viewed in a more esoteric way, as light, consciousness, and life-giving, and possibly a symbol of all the gods of the sky. Jastorf culture in northern Germany represents in archaeology the early expansion southward of the Germanic peoples starting around the 6th century BC. There were mixed burial traditions from urnfield-style graves to cremations, tumuli, and flat graves. But many of the styles are a noticeable continuation of those of the Nordic Bronze Age, and have similarities, if not exact cognates, among Celts. They lived in small villages, farming and raising cattle. Like the Celts, they made many ritual deposits into bogs, lakes, and rivers, and many of the most amazing artifacts that are preserved come from such ritual deposits. The Gundestrup cauldron, although of Celtic origin, was found in a bog towards the northern tip of Denmark's Jutland Peninsula, far removed from any Celt. It was likely taken as plunder after a successful military campaign against the Celts in the south, and dedicated to the gods back home. The same bogs would also provide up bog iron, the early iron that helped transition the Germanic peoples from the Bronze Age, when imports of the important metal dried up. The Germanic language and culture formed and developed primarily in Scandinavia, in the Bronze and Iron Age. This is not only supported by archaeology and genetic studies, but by the accounts of the Germanic people themselves. During the early Middle Ages, a number of histories were recorded by various Germanic peoples: the English, the Lombards, the Goths. All of them claim that they originated in the region of Scandinavia. Tacitus, hundreds of years before, likewise reported that it was the belief of the Germans that they originated there. During the Late Bronze and throughout the Iron Age, Germanic peoples were in contact and likely competition with the Celts, as well as Uralic groups that had moved west into the region of modern Finland and Estonia. However, as political turmoil and fighting in southern Europe and the Balkans began to take a toll on Celtic power in the later Iron Age, Germanic tribes were quick to take up the opportunity to attack. Warmer weather during the Roman climate optimum between 200 BC and 400 AD seems to have had the most dramatic effect in northern Europe. Warmer temperatures meant more productive yields, less harsh winters, and very likely a lower infant mortality rate as a result of better health and living standards. This population explosion in the north, happening at the same time as Celtic power was on the decline, led to a massive expansion of Germanic territory. One tribe after another began to expand and seek new, fertile lands to the south to sustain their growing numbers. The amazing thing about the new genetic study is that it has isolated Scandinavian DNA into 3 zones: north, west, and east. So in many cases, we can roughly tell which region of Scandinavia the migrants came from. The Proto-Germanic language divided into north, east, and west, roughly corresponding to the genetic findings of the study. By 200 BC, various western Scandinavian tribes began to expand from the Jutland Peninsula into Germany, conquering and absorbing the Celts there, and stretching themselves along the coast, increasingly into Belgium, and eventually into Britain. In those regions, the DNA shows a dramatic influx of corded ware ancestry, adding to the gene pool, showing that the Celtic peoples were not ethnically replaced, but were absorbed by the incoming Germanic population. The study also shows that the originating region for the early Angles and Saxons who settled Britain must have been the Jutland Peninsula, again confirming the early historical accounts of the English. The Langobards, or Lombards, are also shown to have primarily originated in southern Scandinavia. Those who would go on to become the Goths began to spread in Poland, forming the Welbark culture. Genetic tests have revealed that they originated from eastern Scandinavia, having crossed the sea and established settlements along the coast, corresponding to Gothic origin tales. Within a few hundred years, their numbers in the east would swell, both through high birth rates and through absorbing other tribes of Celts and others in the region, until they dominated Eastern Europe, and down into Romania and Bulgaria. Though most of these people would later be absorbed into local non-German identities, some pockets, such as in Crimea, a distinct group descended from the Goths still existed, possibly into the 18th century. The recent study has identified these population movements in the genetic record, but it also shows something else. a clear distinction between populations like the Goths, Vandals, and other Germanic peoples who migrated further south, and the Germanic peoples of Scandinavia. Those who migrated were absorbing the local populations, in part probably through taking their women, but also in part through assimilation, with new male haplogroups being taken in as well. The Goths genetically began to look a lot more like those in southern Europe than they did their ancestors in Scandinavia. They were changed by the local population, but the local populations were likewise altered by them, taking on higher percentages of steppe ancestry and typically Germanic physical traits. As Germanic peoples migrated, eventually reaching southern Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, the former heartland of Celtic power, they noticeably shifted the genetics, language, and culture of the region. The test also showed something less expected. There was, during the migration period, a backward flow, a migration into, or even conquest of Scandinavia from those dwelling in northern Germany. Sometime slightly after AD 350, there was a large influx into southern Scandinavia from northern Germany of peoples who had mixed Germanic and Celtic heritage. It's possible that this group gained significant control in Scandinavia and may have even altered the language, which after this period undergoes significant changes from Proto-Germanic, which would lead to the development of Old Norse. It's tempting to match up this revelation with earlier theories that some mythologists proposed, that some of the features of Norse myth, including elements of the god Odin, were acquired through a later conquest of Celtic-influenced elites who established the cult of Odin. This is probably a simplistic picture, as evidence in the writings of Tacitus shows that the god was certainly being worshipped as one of the chief deities of the Germanic people by the 1st century AD. However, such an influx could have had an effect on mythology and religion. From the Proto-Indo-Europeans of the East European steppe to the corded ware, battle axe culture, and the Nordic Bronze and Iron Age, this was the path of development of the Germanic language, culture, and identity. It doesn't differ much from that long theorized by archaeologists and put down in ink by ancient Germanic peoples themselves, but now there is hard genetic evidence to back it up. There is also the interesting feature that the development may have taken place in two different steps, and that the battle axe culture was replaced by a later incoming East Scandinavian group with additional hunter-gatherer ancestry from the Baltics, and that it was this group in particular who laid the foundations of Proto-Germanic. During the migration period, these people would sweep across Europe, changing the genetic and linguistic landscape, but also being changed by it, eventually developing into the various Germanic peoples that we know today. The Germans, Dutch, English, Austrians, Danes, Swedes, Norwegians, Icelanders, and many others, including many in the Americas and Australia. These amazing people and their ethnic and linguistic origins are a true treasure to world history and culture. Well, I hope you liked the video, and if you did, please like, share, and subscribe, and consider supporting the channel on Patreon, PayPal, and through YouTube Super Stickers. I make regular Patreon posts of special content that you won't find anywhere else, so don't forget to support me there, and thanks to all who do. And as always, stand tall.